Hello, everybody. I am Seth Ressler. I am the digital dot connector here at Jacapps Media, where it's my job to help radio stations with their online strategy. And I want to welcome you to today's webinar. This is Mobile 101, what every radio station should know about mobile app strategy. And today we have the COO of our sister company here at Jacapps Media hosting the webinar. Bob Kernan is from jacapps. Jacapps was founded over 8 years ago. It actually started just 100 days after Apple opened up its app store. And it happened because here at Jacapps Media, we do the big tech survey every year. That's the radio industry's largest online survey. And we saw how big mobile was becoming. And so we launched a sister company to help radio stations build their apps. To date, jacapps has built over 1,000 mobile apps, including apps for over 350 radio stations. Their apps have garnered over 28 million downloads. So there's nobody better to walk you through mobile strategy for radio stations. So I'm going to hand the mic over to Bob Kernan.
Thank you, Seth. I want to jump right in here just to kind of go a little deeper on what Seth said about jacapps. We are media experts. We are not just developers. We understand the media business deeply. We've got 30 plus years of experience at this, and we've spent a lot of that time really helping stations and other clients with their digital strategies. So we get this, and at the same time, we're also great developers. We've developed over 1,000 apps, accumulated over 28 million downloads worldwide, and we have strong relationships not only in the radio industry but also with the automotive industry. So the goal here today is to really help you better understand some of the key things when it comes to getting your mobile strategy together, because it's a time now where mobile really has to become a core part of your digital and even your entire station strategy. So we want to help you better understand some key ideas. The first is just getting your strategy right, really thinking about it, not just treating mobile as a box to check off. We're also going to walk through some of the features that are available in radio station mobile apps to help you kind of think about what your mobile strategy could be like. We're going to talk about a very important topic, one that is very, very near and dear to us here, which is how to promote your mobile app. We'll talk more about that, but that's one of the areas where a lot of stations really where mobile strategy falls short. We'll talk about some common mistakes, and then we'll get down to the real important stuff about how to help you monetize your mobile app, because as I said, it's not just a check mark anymore, tick box, on your sort of digital list of things to do. It's important that you're able to make money. So just to set the table a little bit and talk about kind of what the world looks like right now. Today, 8 out of 10 adult Americans has a smartphone. It's an incredible level of penetration on the order of mass media like TV and, of course, radio. And the mobile web really isn't enough. When listeners are on their smartphone, as you can see here, they're spending 86% of their time using apps and only 14% of their time on a mobile web browser. And much of that time is spent in search. And the time spent on mobile numbers are big and just keep getting bigger. Currently, it's 2 hours and 15 minutes per day using apps. So you can imagine that there's a ton of usage out there. It's the place where your listeners are. And so you really want to have your strategy dialed into that. And so the question is, what is your station strategy? And this sounds like an obvious question. And yes, streaming is an important part of that. But even around streaming, there are things to think about. Do you have secondary streams, HD2, other things like that that should be a part of it? And mobile is a chance to really help you reclaim listening occasions. So the places and times when people listened to you in the past where maybe the iPod kind of took over, this is a chance to get back in that space. Most people now, when they're consuming audio content, are doing it on their mobile device, and your station has the chance to be right there next to Pandora, next to Spotify, and next to your competition. But you're also going to need to make those apps available on a variety of new platforms. And we'll talk about those a little bit later, but we have an initiative here at jacapps that we refer to as App Everywhere. And so you really have to be thinking beyond just the smartphone. But what else? You can't take your strategy for granted. Don't assume it's only about streaming, because your app can be a lot more than that. So I encourage you to think about your app strategy in a more expansive way, beyond just putting your linear broadcast content onto another platform. And I'll talk about that in a little more depth in a minute. We've kind of broken down the elements of the app strategy into these 5 things. The first, obviously, is branding. Your app should feel like your brand. It should not be generic and not be buried. Of course, content is incredibly important as well. Distribution, that's where the app everywhere comes into the conversation. And also engagement. That really is about getting your listeners not just consuming your content, but engaging with your brand and talking back to the station. And then, of course, right there in the middle where it belongs is monetization, because that is a crucial part of all of this. So let's start out with branding. It's really important that your app reflects your brand, because your brand matters. It's meaningful to your audience, and it should be reflected in your app. A lot of mobile solutions out there now are, to say the least, a little generic. We think this is a big mistake. All the elements of your brand should come through in your mobile experience. So that means getting the look and feel right. It also means making sure that things like your promotions, your branded promotions, are all there. There's your personalities as well. They should be there as well. They are part of that brand. And so all of that has to come together in your app. And the other thing that I think a lot of people forget about is your app should convey the local aspects of your station. Your biggest competitive advantage against the Spotifys and the Pandoras and a lot of the other things that are competing for your listeners' time is your localness. So look for ways to reflect your town and its unique qualities through your content or other elements within the app. So around content, let's talk about the basics here. Obviously, your audio content is your biggest asset, and mobile is the best distribution platform for it. Your stream is obviously going to be front and center, but you should also be producing and distributing your content in on-demand form. People now are using their phones to consume podcasts, to consume on-demand media, to time shift, to really find the absolute best time for them to listen to your content. And ideally that content isn't just repurposed content from your air. If you can do original or even exclusive podcast content, that's a great way to drive mobile downloads and mobile usage. But your content shouldn't end at your audio content. Many stations out there are producing other things like news feeds, video, things like that, to really get people onto their mobile apps. Michigan Radio, which is here on the left, they prominently feature their newsfeed right on the main screen. And that newsfeed is kept up to date minute by minute. So there are plenty of reasons for people to come back and see what's going on in the state here, because that's really their brand promise. The app on the right, where hip hop lives, uses video very extensively within the app, and those videos are kept just a click off the homepage. So both of these apps really use this content to reinforce their brand promise to the users. So once you've given them their content, the next thing really is to engage them. And this is about a couple different things. The first I want to talk about is the social media piece of it. The majority of digital social interactions these days, things like Facebook, Snapchat, Twitter, and a lot of other ones, are occurring on mobile devices, the majority. So your station's social presence needs to be there as well. Users should be able to interact with you socially right on your app, and your on-air talent should encourage this. That type of engagement can turn casual listeners into real fans and drive the kind of buzz you want for your brand. But it has to be easy, and it has to be contextualized with what is happening on the air. The other thing you can do in your app is get users to create content for you. We have a set of features on our apps that we refer to as upstream. And this is a powerful place to get your listeners to engage with your brand. It's easy on mobile to have users send you audio clips, videos, and photos. So those things can be sent back to you with just a couple of touches, and you then have control over that content to use it on the air, to publish it on your website. But it's a great way to get people really involved and engaged with what you're doing. Some of the other engagement opportunities include things like push notifications. We hear about this a ton from our clients. This is a great and really powerful tool that you have to use with a lot of discretion. Pushing a message from your app to the user's notifications tray is definitely something that will get their attention. It's also something that they will turn off very quickly if you send them too many messages. So the objective here is really to understand what your listener wants from you, not to force things on them that they don't want. Avoid at all costs using it directly for advertising. You can also get into trouble with Apple and Google if you do that. But it is a great way to remind users about special events, breaking news, and other relevant messages that can create new listening occasions, can get people to open the app and engage with you again. The other feature here is the alarm clock. Most radio apps have an alarm clock in them, and it's such a simple thing, but in a world where more than half of people we surveyed wake up using their phone, this is the easiest way to reclaim your spot on their nightstand. But just having the alarm clock in your app isn't enough. You need to use your air to remind listeners to use it. Another thing that's becoming more and more important to users or to stations is registration. Mobile is the perfect channel for identifying your listeners. Of course, you've got an email database, but here's a way to connect listeners and listening on an even higher level. It's a powerful way to better understand and target your audience for your advertisers. New technologies are available that can let you tie users to their activity both on the app and just out in the world, providing radio the kind of attribution that advertisers are really desperate for. And if you add this to your email, you can begin to create a real profile of your user and build that relationship with your listeners that will make you A, better able to serve your listeners, and B, better able to monetize them as well. So at the beginning, I talked about distribution and what we here call app everywhere. So the app rules the smartphone, and its dominance there is spreading to other devices. And it's important for you to start thinking about these things. Currently, people think about apps, they think about smartphones, and they think about tablets. But there are other platforms that are really beginning to matter, including the connected car, where you've got things like Apple CarPlay and Android Auto that take your app from the user's phone and push it right into the center stack in the car. And if you've ever used CarPlay or Android Auto, you know that when the user engages it, the radio goes away. And so to have your app there on that menu, on that main screen, alongside, again, Pandora, Spotify, that sort of thing is really, really important. Of course, we've been thinking a lot around here about home assistants, things like Alexa and Google Home. That is a platform that is really taken off, and creating skills for those, for Amazon Echo, and other applets for Google Home is becoming a real important element in any station's digital strategy. The other way into the home is through smart TVs and devices like Apple TV and Roku. Those are proliferating as well, and I'm sure you've all seen the behavior of people turning on their TV, going to the Pandora app and listening to their Pandora channels right there. It's important that radio start thinking about how they can get in that game as well. And even things like wearables. And this is an area that's still figuring itself out, and the killer application for wearables hasn't really been found too much yet beyond fitness apps and things like that, but it's definitely something to think about. And so your strategy needs to include these elements so that you're making your brand and your content available anywhere your audience wants to access you. So once you've looked through that, it's then all about building the app. And so, there's a lot of different ways you can do it. And the process, of getting the app built is actually pretty simple. The first thing, and you're going to hear me say this again and again, is start with those goals that we talked about at the beginning. Clearly define for yourself and your app developer what you want to accomplish. What is your best, most powerful, and most unique value proposition to your audience? Then it's just about getting the work done. Your developer will do most of the heavy lifting, but you'll need to provide them with the elements from your station that they're going to need. That means things like logos, streams, data feeds. I can tell you from experience that most of the delays we see in development have to do with clients not being ready with those elements. And finally, it's about testing. That means making sure that everything works. But more importantly, it means reaching out to your new users to see if you're accomplishing the goals that you set for yourself. That could mean focus groups, surveys, or even usability tests, where you bring users in and watch them interact with your app. I can tell you from firsthand experience that it is a very enlightening experience, also a very humbling experience, and one that everybody should take on at some point. So I spoke earlier about the importance of promoting your app. So many stations make the mistake of creating a great app, launching it, and then frankly forgetting about it. Again, that box has been checked and they just don't come back to it. But in order to drive downloads, you have to do a series of things to make sure that your mobile app strategy is a success. The first thing is make it easy to find in the App Store, and that means keywords. Be sure your app is named in a way that is most intuitive to your audience, and make sure your description contains things like the name of your market, call letters, dial position, names of key talent, things like that. All of that will make it much easier for people to find and download your app. The second thing is talk about it on the air. That may seem obvious, but you'd be surprised how many stations quit talking about their app on the air after a month or two. It should be something that you do all the time. Also, there's no reason not to create clever production elements to remind users about the app, but also make sure that you talk about it in context. Give users a reason to use your app. Instead of, hey, download our app, say, hey, tell us what you think about whatever the topic is on air. Tweet us from the app and get them some very specific ways that they can open your app and interact with you. You can also talk about it obviously in things like email blasts. Social media is a place where you can constantly remind people of what you're doing. We talked earlier about push notifications. This is a great way to remind people occasionally by giving them a great reason to come to the app, because one of the things we see is a station will get a big bump of downloads, but then the usage of the app will actually begin to go back down. So you have to be there all the time using all of these tools to really push it out there. Don't be afraid to work it into the events that you do. Put it on, the artwork that you use, the banners, things like that that you use at your events. Those are all great ways to remind people about your app and to give them reasons in the moment, in context, to use it. And lastly, don't be afraid to ask your listeners to rate the app. It's a pretty easy thing to do. It helps with discovery, but it also gives you insight to what they think and if you're really hitting the mark for them or not. The great thing about mobile and these apps is that what you build and what you launch on day one can evolve and change and morph over time. But it doesn't make sense to do that if you don't know what you're doing or why you're doing it. So the last piece, if you remember back to my little circle chart there, the important piece in the middle is monetization. So if you've got your mobile strategy and you've got an app and a program for promoting it, hopefully pretty soon you'll have a nice audience. So what then? Well, now it's time to turn it into dollars. And there are lots of very interesting ways to do this. Sponsorship is one of the ways that we think is the most powerful for making money on your app right out of the gate. So give a sponsor a full sponsorship. In the early days when your traffic is low, a sponsorship can help you drive revenue by giving your app over to that single sponsor. Give them 100% of the share of voice in your app. And in addition to their placement throughout the app, you also want to tag them in your on-air promotions, creating a nice, valuable package and a way for an advertiser to exist in a really clean, clutter-free environment. It also gets you out of that uncomfortable conversation about CPMs, because the idea here is it's not about CPMs, it's about you own our app. Pre-roll audio and video ads are probably the most lucrative way to drive revenue. These ads can run before streams and even before podcasts. So there's a lot of really great ways there to generate revenue using rich media, which has much higher CPMs and things like that. Also here on the right, you see interstitial ads. Those are big full screen ads that can pop up before a stream. One of the things to remember about the use of your app is, since most of the content in there is audio, much of the use of your app is going to be done while the phone screen is actually dark. So those audio messages are really important. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't do display ads. Mobile banners can be problematic. They have a very low click-through rate, and the CPMs aren't great, but as part of a package, they can still add value. Here's a couple different types here that you can see on the left. That's an inline ad that actually shows up within the station's recently played list. There are also fixed static banners that can be on every single page. Again, a great way to express a sponsorship for an advertiser. And then there are also dynamic ads. And these ads can be placed pretty much wherever you want in the app, whatever makes the most sense. Another interesting area is branded content. And here's a place where you can really create some unique advertiser experiences. Here's an example of one right here. This is from KISW in Seattle. Their afternoon show, rather, the Men's Room, worked with the local brewery to create their own brand of beer called Men's Room Red. And what we did in the app was created a beer finder. So because the beer at the time wasn't very widely distributed, they wanted to make sure that their listeners and the fans of the show knew where they could get it. So we created this element in the app that lists all the places that it's available, and the user can go and find the place that's nearest them in order to get the product. So these kind of branded experiences are the kinds of things, again, that can add significant value to the app, and if properly promoted, really can be an effective tool for your advertisers. So once you've started using those kinds of tools to drive revenue, you're going to need to be able to see how you're doing, and that means analytics. The most obvious metric is downloads, but it really isn't the best metric. What you'll want to focus on more are unique users, the number of sessions, and the length of those sessions. Those numbers will lead you to the kind of things like the number of sessions a month a listener's doing, and that really helps you to measure their engagement with the app. Of course, you also want to see what they're doing. So you want to analyze the traffic patterns in your app. What are the most popular features? What things are people not using? It's a great way to see if maybe you need to alter the way you're promoting the app, or if there are things you need to remind your listeners about. And then coming back again to the question of goals, you want to measure all of that against your goals to see how you're doing. Now, of course, you won't do everything right, but here are some common mistakes that I hope you can avoid. If your app isn't well aligned with your overall brand strategy, you'll almost certainly fail. What you're doing on air, on your website, and in your app should all be complementary. And don't overwhelm your audience with too many features. It just makes the experience confusing, and they're only going to really grasp 2 or 3 features at a time anyway. One of the things we recommend to clients that have a lot of content is put a few things on the app, and then in a few months, come back and add more. That way you've got a new, refreshed reason to promote the app, a new reason for people to come back, and people who've started using 1 or 2 of the features as a habit are now offered something new that hopefully they'll make a habit as well. And as I've said a few times, promote the app all the time in lots of different ways and through different channels, and promote it contextually so that the user can make an instant connection with why they want to open the app and make it something that they want to do right at that moment. Make sure you get your branding right. It's very easy to let your app become generic, or to update something on your website and forget to update it on the app. You really want to keep your branding really tight and really synchronized. And then the other thing is usability. It goes back to the testing that we were talking about earlier. Make sure that your app's functions are clear and easy to find. because a tough to use app almost always gets deleted. You want to make sure that the items in your navigation are in an order that makes sense to the user, that your labeling of different things within the app aligns with how you're talking about it, so that when people go to look for a certain thing, they know they can easily see where to support it. And last but not least, you have to make sure that your app is supported. Make sure that your app provider is keeping it up to date with the latest OS versions and devices. And just make sure that as people are using it and as you're watching their traffic patterns, you understand what things are working and what things are not. So that's really the overview. That's really Mobile 101. So the next step is up to you. Everything you've heard here is applicable no matter who builds your app. But we certainly hope that you either have chosen or you will choose us. As Seth said at the beginning, we've helped over 350 stations by building their apps and helping them figure out their mobile strategy. And we are passionate about supporting our product, so you're always up to date with the latest features, operating systems, and devices. If you want to learn more, visit our website or feel free to reach out to us directly. Thanks so much for spending some time with us, and we look forward to talking to you more about your mobile strategy. Have a great afternoon. Thanks.